American English, American English, American English webinar series. Teach and learn. American English webinar series.
Welcome everyone to the American English webinar series brought to you by the American English team at the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C. Could you please raise your hand if you could hear me? All right, that's awesome. Great to see all those hands going up. Thanks everybody for being so patient with us during our technical difficulties today. And it's awesome to see that so many of you hung in there with us today and are here participating even though we got a late start. So way to go everybody. Give yourselves a round of applause. Thanks for being here. All right, so as you know, my name is Moderator Katie. I'm part of the American English team, and you'll see Moderator Amy and Moderator Heather as well today in the chat box to help you. As you know, our webinar series is now called American English Webinar Series. It's 60 minutes long, and we are connected to the Teacher's Corner monthly themes. Here's our schedule for the rest of the course. We have one more webinar after today, which is on November 18th. It'll be presented by Tabitha Kidwell. And we already have our next series all ready to go, so if you would like to register for the next series, which begins on January 20th, please contact your RELO or local U.S. Embassy. As you know, we have the chat box that you're participating in now. The presenter will do a few polls today, some questions to ask you, and if you have any problems with your sound, you can follow along in the caption pod. Each webinar series consists of 6 webinars, and they take place every other Wednesday. If you attend at least 4 out of 6, you'll receive an e-certificate from your RELO or local U.S. Embassy. Don't forget to submit your attendance at the very end of the webinar. And of course, we definitely hope that you will join our Ning if you haven't already. You can find all the materials for today and all of our other webinars on the Ning, so please join there, and please join in the discussion afterwards. So now it's time for today's webinar. This session is Building Autonomy through Cooperative Classroom Management. In this webinar, you will learn techniques that assist in creating effective cooperative and communicative classrooms, especially in classes of 20 students or more. Using the techniques illustrated in this webinar, you will learn how to maintain control while increasing student autonomy and providing each student with a role in the classroom management and with the opportunity to improve critical and creative thinking skills in English. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Gina Rhodes. Gina is an English language specialist, and she currently lives in Melbourne, Australia. She also works in the Master of Arts in Teaching program at the University of Southern California. She was a specialist in Ganzhou, China, a senior English language fellow in Shantou, China, a visiting scholar in the Strengthening Higher Education Project in Laos, and an English language fellow in Morocco. So we're so excited to have you here today, Gina. Thanks so much, and we'll go ahead and let you get started.
Okay, thank you so much for that introduction, Katie. As she said, welcome to American English Webinar 1.5, Building Autonomy through Cooperative Classroom Management. My name is Gina, and I'm really excited to be with everyone today and see everyone here. I'm sorry for the slight late start, but let's get started, okay? We're going to start today by talking about what is cooperative learning, and then we'll talk about the difference between the traditional classroom and the cooperative classroom, and I'll tell you what is PIES, and then we'll talk about how specifically I use cooperative learning and rainbow learning in my classroom, and I'll show you a short video clip of how I introduce rainbow learning, and then we'll get on to some examples of how to use it in your classroom before having a short summary quiz at the end. Okay, so let's get started. What is cooperative learning? Today we're going to talk about the what and the why first, and then we'll get into the when and the how. Okay, before I tell you my definition of cooperative learning, tell me how you would define cooperative learning. Go ahead and respond in the chat box. A teaching and learning approach. Teamwork, good, okay. Working in a group. Sharing ideas, great. Working in groups, team learning, lots of great answers. Helping each other, good, okay. Got a lot of great answers coming very quickly in the chat box. You guys have a lot of ideas about this. This is great. Okay, so let me tell you. Basically, in its essence, cooperative learning are structured student interactions, okay, and pies. And we're going to talk more about specifically what pies are in a minute, but that is the main idea of cooperative learning. And you guys did a great job of giving more details about what that is, okay? Great. So, whoops, before we go in, let's take a quick poll and see if you think this is cooperative learning or traditional classroom, okay? You can answer more than one, so whichever ones you think are cooperative learning. Okay, I'm seeing people get up out of your seat and look at what others did. Okay, a lot of people are answering help your partner solve a problem or question. Okay, again, you can answer more than one, so pick all the ones that you think are cooperative learning. Lots of people like help your partner solve the problem or question. Okay. Looks like, yeah, help your partner solve a question is getting a lot of answers. Learning involves healthy noise is getting some answers. Good. Get up out of your seat and look at what others did. Verbalize to learn. Okay, good. All right, well, it looks like you guys are getting a lot of the right answers, which is what we wanted to hear. So let's move back to the PowerPoint. Okay, good. So let's look at them carefully, okay? In the traditional classroom, we have a good class as a quiet class, but especially in a language classroom, we want to hear some healthy noise. And we're going to talk more about how to create healthy noise instead of chaos later. Okay? And we move from keep your eyes on your own paper to help your partner to solve it. And this is related to what Vygotsky calls the zone of proximal development. For example, if you have a group of 4 students, you'll have some students who know vocabulary in some topics well and not in others, and students that are great at writing but not in speaking, and students that are shy and reluctant to speak. Okay, so you have students at all different levels in one group, and they're better at some things than others. And with cooperative learning, they get to help each other, and all of them get do their best and work at their highest potential. Okay. We moved from sit quietly to get up and look around and see what others did, which most of you caught that was cooperative learning. So similar to what we discussed in the previous slide, instead of always working on their own, students get ideas from others to improve their work. And we move from talking is cheating to verbalize to learn. Okay, especially in the language classroom, the more students are able to practice the target language, the more they remember. And they can receive instant feedback from their classmates as to whether what the language they used was comprehensible or not. It's very important to verbalize to learn. So let's move on to the why, okay? PIES is the what and the why of cooperative learning. What cooperative learning is and why we would want to use cooperative learning instead of traditional classroom or traditional group work. So what's different about cooperative learning from traditional group work? Okay. The first one is positive interdependence, individual accountability, equal participation, and simultaneous interaction. And we're going to look at each of these principles more specifically, okay? So these 4 principles that Kagan has listed in his book on cooperative learning focus on how we can make, basically how to make group work for your students and help them become more autonomous and engaged in your classroom. So let's look carefully at the first one, positive interdependence. Okay. Positive interdependence. Is my gain your gain, and is help necessary? Okay. This drives the group's cooperation. Okay. And positive interdependence, we're focusing on the fact that the students need to work together to solve the goal. So each person has a part to play, and by doing all of their parts together, they achieve their goal more quickly and efficiently. Okay. The next part is individual accountability. Is individual performance required? This holds the individual accountable for the content and for sharing among their peers. Again, each person has a role to play, and everybody needs to be held accountable for their role. Okay? The individual must perform in front of someone, not necessarily the teacher or the whole class. So as you know, when we have big classes, your students may not have time all of them to perform in front of you, but in this way they get to perform in front of someone, and they need to do some kind of individual performance, at least with their team, and often also as a whole class, but at least with their team. Okay? And equal participation. How equal is the participation? This enables equal opportunity and time for all the participants, and talking time requirements and taking turns encourage this idea. And by talking term requirements, a lot of the structures and things that we do when we're using cooperative learning are timed so that everyone gets a chance to participate, and we take turns so that everyone on the team gets a chance to answer. So these are some of the ideas of equal participation. And again, as often we talk about when we're using traditional group work, some students dominate and others are logs. We want to avoid the hogs and logs, where one person hogs the time and others sit like logs. So with equal participation, we can avoid that part of traditional group work. Okay? The last part is simultaneous interaction. What percentage are overtly active at once? Okay? Efficiency increases when many students are interacting at the same time. Oops. So if you have a classroom of, say, 40 students, and you're talking with each one one-on-one, then only one student is active at one time. However, if you have your students in groups of 4, in a class of 40 students, then 10 students are speaking at one time. So you get a lot more efficiency in your classroom, and your students are getting a lot more practice, and they're becoming a lot more confident in the language a lot faster. So let's review again. We have positive interdependence, individual accountability, equal participation, and simultaneous interaction. And these principles work together to form the what and the why of cooperative learning. And let's look at the when. I noticed when we had the poll up earlier, we were getting a lot of responses for people saying that the percentage of class time that the students spend speaking to each other is less than half the time, or about 50% of the time. And how often do your students sit in groups? Most of you said less than half of the time. So we're going to talk about why that might be the case. Why are your students not sitting in groups more often? What are some of the challenges of using cooperative learning or group work with your students? What are some of the challenges you've had in the past? Some people say in large classes it's not suitable. We're going to talk about how we can do it with that. Discipline, distraction. Noise, yes, and we're going to talk about that. Okay, too much talking. All right, well, we can never have too much talking as long as it's in the target language. Loss of concentration, yeah, sometimes that can be a problem. We're going to talk about how we can minimize that. Okay, teaching students how to contribute in teams. That's an important skill to teach them. Lack of attention, noisy, yes. All right, so a lot of these are some of the issues that we're going to talk about today. But yes, these are common challenges when we're working with students in groups. Okay, so let's talk about the how. We're going to talk about rainbow learning. Rainbow learning is a system that I organized with my students to help them work in teams of 4 so that we could minimize a lot of these problems that I noticed as a beginning teacher where I was having when I asked my students to work in groups. Okay, so let's look at what I do with my students is I put them in groups of 4 and each person gets a color: red, orange, yellow, and green. You'll notice that they follow the colors of the rainbow. Everybody gets a color and every student keeps that color the whole time that they're with that team. So I would like to explain this to you, but I think that it'd probably be easier to explain if we watch a video instead of me telling you. So while we're watching the video, I'd like you to focus your attention on a couple of things. What roles did I give the participants? And how do these roles relate to pies? Okay, so let's watch the video. No, that's good. All right, we're good. Okay, we got all the reds standing up. Reds, tonight, you're going to be the volume monitor. Okay, it's quiz time. What does the volume monitor do?
Panic.
Keep the noise of the group and make the group to the topic of the discussion.
Not the topic. No, it has nothing to do with the topic.
Noise. Yes. Control the noise.
Control the noise, right?
Yes.
Okay, you are the remote control, like a TV, okay? All right? If your team is loud, it's your fault. All right? Okay. You are going to, when it's time for your team to be quiet and say nothing, it's your job to tell your team to mute, okay? No talking. All right? So you make sure the volume isn't too high or too low, and when it's time to be silent, you silence them, okay? You can do that, right? Okay, red, you may sit down. Orange, stand up. Okay, orange is the language monitor. I'm going to go back here and talk to people. Okay. No hitting, no beating, you don't get to say English, okay? No. All right? No hurting of your classmates. Just politely remind them, okay? Please speak English, okay? This is our chance to practice our English. Let's take advantage, okay? Be nice to your classmates, though, all right? Yellow, stand up. Yellow. Your job is the participation monitor. Okay, can you read it? It's a little complicated because it's yellow, okay, on a whiteboard. All right. What do you think the participation monitor's job is?
Every member to join the activity.
Right, yeah. Because, you know, she's really shy. Right? She doesn't like to talk, but she loves to talk a lot. And so your job, after she's been talking, you're like, you know, that's a really good point. I like it. But I would also like to hear from her. So let's give her a chance to talk too, okay? So you, both greens stand up. All the greens. Green 1 and 2. All right. Okay. Green. You are the topic monitor. All right. Yes. You know, sometimes, I know, some of you are already teaching. Yes. And sometimes when you tell your students to get in groups, they forget the topic. Yeah? They start talking about everything else except what you want them to talk about, right? Yes. So, your job then, as the topic monitor, is
Make sure all the team members get involved in the activity.
yes, on the correct topic. Yes. You can't talk about your boyfriend. That the students had a lot of different roles that each one plays, and each one is assigned one role, okay? Just to review, red is the volume monitor, and as a lot of you said, sometimes when you put students in groups, it gets really noisy. So this is a very important role to have. They control the volume of their team. They make sure that everyone on the team doesn't speak too loudly or too softly, and most importantly, she or he is also the mute button when the team should be quiet. All right, so this has a very important role, and you have one student in each team who's in charge of keeping their team's volume not too loud so that you're not disturbing other classes. This is one of the most important roles, okay? The second role, orange, is the language monitor. The language monitor reminds the team to practice the target language. Okay? If someone forgets, the language monitor reminds the group politely, and I emphasize politely. You'll see it in the video that I was teasing them that to make sure that they are polite. And this is important to teachers, especially if you're working with children, but it's also important to remind adults to be polite and how to be polite, and especially to give them the language for how to be polite in English with their team members. So this is an important point to make, and it's an important role for a team member to have. Okay. The next one is the participation monitor. And again, we were talking about those hogs and logs earlier. So the participation monitor's job is to make sure that there are no hogs or logs in the group, okay? So again, this person politely reminds dominant group members to let others speak and encourages the quiet ones to give their opinion so that it's more even participation, okay? And this is, of course, similar to the E in equal participation in pies, okay? And green is the topic monitor and the timer. Okay, this person politely reminds the team to stay on topic if they forget, And again, this is some of the things that you guys mentioned were some of your challenges when you do group work, is the student staying on task. And he keeps track of time if it's required. I don't need a timer for every task, but as we talked about earlier, some of the structures and the activities that I do with my students do require that everybody speak for a specific amount of time. So I like to have that person know who the timer is so that I don't have to take class time for them to figure out who the timer is going to be. So it's just set ahead of time. And that's one of the things I love about Rainbow Learning, is that everybody knows what the role is when class starts, and all of the activities can go very smoothly because everybody's ready to go. Okay? Just a few tips that I've had. When I give the students a color with their team, they keep the same color throughout the time that they work with those teams. So once they've had a color, red, orange, yellow, green, each student keeps that color the whole time that they're with that team. But I do change the roles. I'll rotate those 4 basic roles that I give the students so that they, when they come to class each day, they know what their main role is. And I add other roles in depending on what roles I need for a particular activity that they're going to do. So I might need a one person to be the writer, or I might need a person from each team to collect the papers. There's a lot of different roles that I might add for the students. And I like to keep them on the same team for about 4 or 5 classes. But I also usually change the teams at a natural break, like when we finish a project or when we finish a unit. And it just seems like a natural place to change teams. I want the students to stay in a team long enough to get to know each other, but I also want them to get to meet other people in the classroom and to make lots of different friends throughout the class time. So it's a good time to change things up, okay? Also, I wanted to make a quick mention about absences and odd numbers. When you have teams of 4, you might have 1 student absent, but then you've still got a team of 3 students, okay? And as we know as teachers, even though I love to have that perfect set of 4 students, it's very rare that your class will have an even number of students so that you can have all teams of 4. What I usually do is set it up so that if there are a couple of teams of 3, one person will have 2 colors. And that means whatever role that the person with that color has, then they're going to assume that role as well. Okay, for example, if I have a team of 3 students, there's no green. So I'll ask yellow to be green as well. So if, for example, yellow is the topic monitor and green is the language monitor, for that particular team, the yellow student will be yellow and green. So they will have both of those monitoring roles. Okay, and you'll also notice that I like my students to practice the target language in the classroom, because for most of my students, my classroom is the only time that they get a chance to practice their English. So, or at least when they feel confident practicing their English. So I do ask them to speak English throughout the class. However, they are language learners, so if they don't know what to say, then it's okay to ask how to say it in their home language. Okay. Oops, sorry. Okay. So they can say, how do you say blank in English? In English, it's useful. And what does monitor mean? It means blank or blah. Okay. It keeps moving. And of course, anytime we have rules, we have to have a consequence if we don't follow the rule. So here are some of the possible penalties that my students have had in the past. The one that they love is to sing a song in English, or to stand for a certain amount of time. They might have to stand for 2 minutes or for 5 minutes, or do something ridiculous. And the one that was the most popular this year was making someone dance Gangnam Style. Raise your hand if you have danced Gangnam Style, or at least seen the video of someone dancing Gangnam Style. See lots and lots of hands going up. That's great. Yeah, so my students like to make that one of the penalties. They might also write a reflection of an activity that they did in English, or another really popular one with my students is to bring candy for the class. So these again are the penalties that the students decide. I don't decide what the penalties are. They vote as a class to what penalty they want. The penalties are mostly for someone who's not doing what they are doing their monitoring role. But sometimes students have other penalties, such as if someone comes to class late, or if someone's not using English when they should be, they might also have a specific penalty for that. But most of my penalties are for not doing their monitoring role. And the students love to give out the penalties. So they are usually they're the ones enforcing it. Sometimes I will be the enforcer if they aren't enforcing it, but they like to catch someone saying, she was speaking Chinese and you didn't remind her to speak English. You're not doing your job. So they'll make them do the penalty. And so if it's sing a song in English, I'll usually have them do it during the break. If it's to stand, then they'll do it right there. Sometimes they have to do something like touch their nose or for 2 minutes or something. So I try to make it something that they can do right away. But again, I leave it up to the students to decide what the penalty is going to be. Now let's move on to activities that we can do with the teams. Okay, so what cooperative activities could you do or have you done during a unit about peace? Let's get some of your ideas on what you could do with peace. A poster, read a paragraph and collect information, do a role play, good, write a song, information search, a discussion, there's a lot of things. Drama, okay, lots of excellent ideas, okay. Debate, great idea, make a collage, do a survey, nice, I like it. Research, create a poster, share their experiences. Yes, you guys have a lot of great ideas. Mind maps, make a timeline, read poems, sing songs, yes. Find quotes about peace, good. Solve a web quest, nice. A collage. Okay, this is great. You guys have come up with a lot. Let's move on. When I introduced the topic of peace, I think the teams can take turns making a list of words related to peace. So the students can, for example, have one piece of paper per team, and each person takes turn writing a word that they think is related to peace or reminds them of something peaceful. And they can pass that paper around and make a long list of vocabulary they already know related to peace, and we can share those and all learn more words. They can talk about their definitions of peace. They can discuss a time when they or someone they know had a conflict and how it was resolved. Was it a peaceful solution or was it a non-peaceful solution, and how could it been resolved more peacefully, and have that type of discussion. And then later they can create a role play or a presentation about peace issues. And so I use these topics of peace when I teach classes on world issues, peace education, and gender equality. So I usually teach adults, and these are topics that are appropriate for adults, but depending on your class's age and their level of English, you may want to choose different topics. So it's always important to remember to choose topics that are appropriate for your class, your culture. Okay, and we're going to look at, I know often when we're talking about cooperative learning, we focus on improving students' speaking, and that's of course really important, but you also, when you're using cooperative learning, you can work on all 4 of the basic skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. All 4 skills can be worked on. And we're going to look at a reading. Okay, and I want you to think about what cooperative activities you could do with this reading. And I'm going to read it to you as you think of some ideas. You have to serve the customers, the boss told her, and he punched her. If not, we will beat you to death. Do you want that? Wrath stopped protesting, but she sobbed and refused to cooperate actively. The boss forced her to take a pill. The gangsters called it the happy pill. This is an excerpt from Half the Sky, and I use readings from this book often when we're talking about gender equity and peace issues and world issues. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of role play. Okay, writing the next part of the story. Yes, predicting what comes next. Finishing the story. Yes. Making a verb list. Okay. Performing it. Okay. Jigsaw reading. Lots of ideas. Values lesson. Good. Create a sketch or role play. Nice. Writing poems. Writing a prequel to the story. Yes, this story could have a prequel and a sequel and all kinds of things happening. How would they change the situation? Right. Class debates. Create a Muppet conversation. I like that. I love the Muppets. Crosswords. Creating a comment. Create the title. Okay. Create a video. Okay, these are a lot of great ideas. Okay, well, let's talk quickly about some of the things that I did with the students. The first thing I did was have them do a quick write. And a quick write is where they write individually for about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the level of your students, about what they think the story is about, what they think the characters are discussing. And then after they've had a chance to write individually for 5 to 10 minutes, then they get back together with their team and read what they've written and discuss what they think is happening in the story. Okay? What do you think this story is about? And you might have a team Q&A, and depending on the level of your students, you can have them write their own questions, or you can provide the questions and they answer them as a team. So the team might write questions like, what job does Wrath have? Why did her boss punch her? And why doesn't she want to do her job? So they could discuss the answers to those questions and write more questions about the reading. Okay. Another thing is some of you mentioned is to do a jigsaw reading. And a jigsaw reading is when each member of the team gets one part of the whole story and teaches it to the rest of the class. And by this, I mean that you would divide the story into 4 parts, and each team member has one part of the story, and they will summarize and give the main points of their part of the story to the team, and then the team together puts the whole story in the correct order and discusses it and what it means. Okay? Okay, so we're getting a lot of great ideas, okay? And after team discussions, I like to give my students time to really talk about the topic and think about each topic that we're doing. But after the discussions, you want to give some time for you as a teacher to hear what each of the teams have been talking about. What I like to do is call on one color, such as green. And green will stand and summarize what each team discussed or give the answer to a specific question. And I don't like to tell them ahead of time which color is going to be the one to stand and summarize, because I find this helps keep everyone engaged, because they're not sure if they're going to be the one that needs to summarize. So that keeps all the participants taking notes and staying focused, because they might be the one who needs to summarize the discussion of the group, or they might be the one to answer a specific question. So they all need to be ready, and they stay more engaged and motivated throughout the discussion, in case they're the ones that has to stand and give the answer. Okay? So these are many of the things that I do with my students to help them stay motivated in the classroom and create more autonomy. So I told you at the beginning we were going to do a quiz at the end. So let's move to the quiz for pies. Do you remember what pies is? Let's see. What does the P in pies stand for? Ooh, a lot of you are getting the right answer. Very high. Okay. What does the I in pie stand for? Ooh, 100%. Nice work. Well, almost 100%. Okay. And what does the E in equal participation? Okay, another high percentage. We're in the high 90s. You guys remember a lot of this. Ooh, and the S. All right, 100% simultaneous interaction. You guys remember this. That's great. Okay, well, let's go back to the quick review of this. Most of you got the right answer, but just in case, P is positive interdependence. And remember, this is a positive way the students are working together, and they need to work together to solve their goals. Okay. Individual accountability. Again, each student has an individual job to do, and they need to be held accountable for their job. Equal participation. Again, with the participation monitor, we're making sure that everyone is participating equally. And simultaneous interaction. We've got lots of groups going on at the same time, so students are maximizing the amount of language that they're using in the classroom. And those are the main principles of cooperative learning. Everyone learning together and working cooperatively. Now, in rainbow learning, as I said, we rotate the monitoring roles, but we have red, orange, yellow, and green, which represent the roles that the student might have. The main ones that I give my students are volume monitor, language monitor, participation monitor, and topic monitor and timer. What other roles could you give your students that you might, oh, one person has someone being the punisher. Okay. Okay, group leader, homework monitor, okay, note taker, good. I noticed that a lot of you are saying the group leader, but like I said, I don't like to have one person on the team who's considered the leader, because I want all of the students to be participating equally and all of them taking a lead in some aspect of the team. So I don't usually have any color be the leader for the whole class, but they might be the leader for one activity. Okay, a lot of great ideas. Secretary, material monitor, okay. Cleaning monitor, oh, that's a good one to have. Okay. Grammar monitor, that's good, especially if they're focused on one specific grammar point. Yeah, someone taking attendance. Someone focused on penalties, the penalties monitor, okay? It's good. You guys have very creative. You got a lot of great ideas. Okay, excellent. The self-assessor. Oh, and the artist, yeah. So for some activities, you may want to have one person who is the designated artist. Okay, great job, you guys. Okay. Now, when I talk to people about cooperative classroom management, I get a lot of questions, and many of them are ones that you have brought up in the past. So I'm going to talk to you for a couple minutes about these frequently asked questions, but and then at the end I'll ask you if you have any other questions. Okay. The first one is I have over 40 students in my class. How can I do this? And that question is a very important question. And as you saw in the video, there were much more than 40 students in that classroom. It was well over 100, but they were in groups of 4 and they were doing the activities and very engaged. So it's possible. When I teach this, I usually have over 40 students in my classroom. Last semester, I had over 80 students in each class, which was a crazy number of students. But with the monitoring roles, we still had a really effective class, okay? So raise your hand if you have over 40 students in your class. Oh, I see tons and tons of hands coming. Yeah. Right. So yes, then this can get complicated when you have lots of students in your class. But I feel like the more students you have, the more important it is for you to give opportunities for each student to speak in class. If not in your classroom, when are they going to get a chance to build their confidence in English? And so as we talked about earlier, when you have, the more students you have in the classroom, the more organized your teams are, the more your students are able to practice and give their opinions throughout the class. So, like I said, the more students you have, the more important it is to use cooperative classroom management. Okay? The next question I get a lot is that this takes a lot of time. How can I work it into my classroom and still cover all the material? This is a good question. Raise your hand if you have a set curriculum that your school gives you and you have to finish it by a specific time. Okay, I'm seeing hands go up again. That's right. It's very common that this is that you have a set curriculum that you can't alter very much because you have to finish by a certain time. And I'll have to say that this does take time at first, but once you get the students into groups and you get used to asking the groups to discuss things in your curriculum, you'll find that often you have more time and the students understand the material better because they've had a chance to really discuss it with their team. So I find that after they get used to it, you're not worried about, will I have time to cover the material, because you are covering the material and the students are learning it much better than if they had just listened to you lecture about the material, because they're discussing it and they're internalizing it and they're staying engaged and motivated. So it's very helpful, actually. And this one I get often. I tried this before, it was just too loud. How can I do cooperative and communicative activities without disrupting other classes? Well, as we talked about earlier, we have the volume monitor in your in each team, so that helps a lot. But I won't tell you that the first couple of times it's not loud. Even with volume monitors, when the students are just getting used to this, they will be loud at the beginning, especially if they're not used to talking to each other. They will be so excited that they get to talk to each other that it does get a little loud. But just be patient. The next time it'll be quieter, and the more you enforce the roles, especially the volume monitor role, the easier it gets. So that's the best advice I can give you with that one, is to just be patient. After they get used to talking in groups, then they will they'll settle down and you'll be left with just the healthy noise that we want in our classroom. Okay, so where can I find more about cooperative learning and how to use it in my classroom? This is the question I love to get from people after we've done this workshop. And you'll see here, these are the list of references that I used to prepare for this workshop, this webinar. And you'll see the one in blue is the article that I wrote on called Minimizing the Chaos Through Cooperative Classroom Management. And this article is on the Ning, and you can also find it in americanenglish.state.gov. And here in this article, I go into more detail than we had time during this webinar about how to use cooperative classroom management and how to use it effectively in your classroom. Sorry, excuse me. And this brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for your participation. I think we still have a few minutes for questions and comments, so